Welcome to Plattsmouth Bible Church, where we have served the community of Plattsmouth now for 20 years through the food pantry.
And I had attended the Berean Church in Lincoln, and I really liked it. And my husband and I, who had been going to church in Plattsmouth, we were looking for another church. So I was looking at the Berean Church. Kathy had taken me there. Her sister, Sarah Eister, led her to Pastor Mike. She led me to Pastor Mike and Connie, and he was in the Berean Church in Bellevue.
Connie and I moved to Plattsmouth in December of 1990. In our minds, the reason was to get to a less populated area. We had 2 young daughters, and I still worked as the youth pastor at Pleasant View Berean Church in Bellevue. Like many others, our main life was in Bellevue and Omaha, and we really just slept in Plattsmouth. That being true, we knew very few people in Plattsmouth. In September of 1996, the yearly Berean Convention was hosted by Broken Bow Berean Church in the Sandhills. The theme that year was reaching your community through the church. Many sessions were focused on inroads to people in your community. After one evening session, Connie and I returned to our little motel room, and both of us almost simultaneously asked each other, "Do you think God is telling us something?" God was telling us to either move back to Bellevue, Omaha, or to start something in Plattsmouth. And then the next morning found Kurt Lehman, the former Berean president and pastor of Lincoln Berean Church, and we asked him, how do we start a church? Kurt, who was a go-getter, replied, "Where?" So we mentioned Plattsmouth, and Kurt told us that there were already people in Plattsmouth who were interested in a Berean church. He gave us some names of people, none of whom we knew, and encouraged us to meet. We also had a few people from Pleasant View Berean who were interested, including Greg and Eva Zamora.
20-something years ago, we came with the United States Air Force and stationed at Offutt. And while working there, I explored to find out churches in the area that were good. Located several, but I sat knee to knee with one of the overseers at Pleasant View Berean Church, and that was a cool experience. Everything lined up, our doctrines were the same. Once we started there, we did get to meet Mike and Connie and other parts of the leadership, and we became part of that group of people, along with doing different ministries in the church.
Also in that initial prayer group was Diane Stewart, who recently has found Plattsmouth Bible Church again.
And 20 years ago, I was introduced to Mike and Connie through my friend Kathy Morehouse. And I spent time with Mike and Connie praying for this church. At that time, Mike and Connie were just talking about starting a Berean church in Plattsmouth.
Every Monday night for 2 years, we met and prayed for God's leading with this idea. On the first night we met, Connie and I weren't sure what would come of this, so we prayed, and then Connie got out her notebook and asked, "Okay, now what do we do?" Bill Eister, along with his wife Sarah, formerly Meyer, were part of our group, and Bill replied to Connie, "Now we wait." Wait? Wait for what? Bill patiently explained that we wait on the Lord. That was hard, but God was working the whole time. That week of our first meeting, Bill and Sarah Eister, who were real estate agents, stopped at an old church building on 16th Street and 1st Avenue to talk to a guy who was working there. His name was Steve Carmichael. He had just purchased the building from next-door neighbor Vic Chudy and was planning to remodel the building and make it into a house. Sarah was especially disappointed, thinking that that building would have been the ideal location for the new church. So for 2 years we prayed and dreamed and discussed. So over the summer of 1998, we began to advertise in the Plattsmouth Journal. There was no Casgram at the time. We set the start date for October 25th, 1998, and the location was the Plattsmouth Community Center on Avenue A near Linder Tire and Auto. Around that same time, Bill and Sarah Eister, who had been thinking about the building at 16th Street and 1st Avenue, stopped and talked to Steve Carmichael again. Since their original interaction 2 years earlier, Carmichael had gotten a divorce and was now ready to sell the building. He had done some major work. We prayed again and quickly got the lead from the Lord that we should purchase this building. On October 25th, we had our first gathering of the new Plattsmouth Bible Church. There were 117 people in attendance, almost all from Pleasant View Berean or other interested parties from other churches. I was still the youth pastor at Pleasant View and the worship leader, so we had decided to have the new Plattsmouth church gatherings at 3 p.m. on Sundays, after the Pleasant View morning church and before the Sunday night youth group time. We called it Church at 3. The @ symbol was really catching on at the time, so we capitalized on it. As we reviewed the people in attendance that first Sunday, we narrowed it down to 4 people who were not part of some other church from somewhere else. We met in the community center from October of 1998 to March of 1999. At the same time, we started working on the building. We decided to occupy the basement first and meet there, since it would be most quickly brought into use. This building had sat empty since the 1980s and had numerous problems. The basement was covered in mold. The room, which is now the nursery, had standing water and snakes and frogs in it. There was no water, no heat, no insulation. Raccoons lived in the steeple. Steve Carmichael had worked almost exclusively on the main floor, so there was a lot of deterioration in other parts of the building that had not been touched for nearly 20 years. I had told the Berean Fellowship that it would take a couple weeks to get the building operational. I knew nothing. God knew what He was going to do, though. Lots of work and volunteer time went into preparing the building for use. We can't take the time today to share the hundreds of stories, but we can share a few.
This building, oh my goodness, we got it. It was a mold trap, black mold top to bottom. Lots of work. We've had different ministries come into town. The sewers came in and they helped us. We've had youth groups in here climbing around in all the attic and stuff. Just amazing what God has done to bring this about.
We also have hundreds of stories of how God provided for this brand new church family. One that shows His blessing and provision is the story of chairs. At the community center, there were plenty of chairs to set up for the groups that were gathering there. As we worked on the basement at the 1601 building and got it ready for use, we scraped and painted walls and sealed concrete and swept and cleaned, and at some point, near March of 1999, we determined that we could start meeting at the building. So we set a date and prepared to start meeting in this building. There was no carpet, no restrooms, no heat or air conditioning. The week of our move, we met on Monday for prayer and realized as we talked that we had no chairs to sit in when we got to the building. So we prayed about chairs that evening. The next day, Tuesday, I went to a Berean pastors meeting in Olathe, Kansas, and mentioned to the pastors that were gathered there that we were in desperate need of chairs by the upcoming Sunday. Well, the pastor of Olathe Berean Church asked how many chairs we would need, and by that time, people attending, there were 30 or 40 of us. He asked if we could use 160 chairs. The Olathe Berean Church had just replaced all their folding chairs and had the old ones immediately available for use. On Wednesday, my dad and I drove back to Olathe, Kansas and loaded up 160 folding chairs. God provided 4 or 5 times the number of chairs we needed with only days to spare, and He provided them at no cost. We have been able since to pass on those chairs to other church startups and pass God's blessing on to them. The youth group from the Berean Church in North Platte, Nebraska came for a week as a mission trip to work on projects around our building. This group cleaned, painted, prayed, and prepared for future construction. God provided some young and fearless people to do things other people could not and probably should not have done. The youth group and others from Pleasant View Berean Church also came and served. In the meantime, God was implementing various ministries in this new church family. Vacation Bible School has been held since the beginning. With no air conditioning and little light, it was very primitive, but God used VBS to serve children and families in the summers of our early existence. God allowed us to host men's meetings and women's meetings. God provided families to host hay rides and cookouts. God began to use this brand new church family to connect with the people of Plattsmouth and the area around us. A man named Tom Holkabor at Pleasant View Berean Church was a painter and a handyman. We hired Tom to scrape and paint the exterior of our building. He power washed it, scraped it, and sanded it by hand before applying paint, which lasted until 3 or 4 years ago when we began installing siding. Tom's paint job is still visible on the north end of the building. Work on the main floor continued for 5 years. God provided much of the labor for free through a group called the Sowers. These were retired people who traveled around in their RVs and helped with church and other spiritually based projects. The Sowers, including Frank and Nora Eister from here in Plattsmouth, leveled floors, installed drywall, ran electrical lines, and many other projects. It was because of the Sowers that we received our commercial Bun coffee maker we still use today. With lots of work and lots of time devoted by lots of people, the main floor was renovated and ready for use. Carpet was installed and chairs were purchased. In 2004, we moved from the basement to the main floor for Sunday gatherings. In 2007, another momentous event happened that helped shape who PBC is today. Twin Rivers Fellowship Church of the Christian Missionary Alliance was losing their pastor. We had a series of get-togethers and decided that our two churches could combine and become one. Since 2007, we have continued serving families in Plattsmouth. VBS, food pantry, clothing giveaway, youth group, community picnics, service projects, prayer, benevolence, Christmas boxes near and far. Many ways of involvement in God's kingdom building activities. Youth ministry has been an important part of our outreach for our 20-year history. Immediately, we took mission trips and had youth activities with various leaders over the years. God is not done with our involvement in ministry to youth. He has things in the works, so keep listening for that. God Himself has put Plattsmouth Bible Church here for His purposes. Our consistent message of Christ in you, experiencing the salvation and the righteousness of God, will continue to be proclaimed until the Lord either shuts us down or He returns. No matter which, we are devoted to Jesus Christ, His glory, and His kingdom as we go and grow.